Did Jesus claim to be God? This is a common question that is asked by Muslims to catch the Christians out by trying to disprove the deity and divinity of Jesus. Now, another similar question they ask is, where does Jesus say, "I am God, worship me" in the Bible? Now, before we answer this question, let's get one thing straight. Jesus does not have to say, "I am God, worship me" in order to claim his divinity. Rather, it's a stupid argument made from them that just because he did not say those exact words, he is not God. They get this argument from the Old Testament, where God repeatedly says, "I am God," such as in Genesis 35 verse 11 or Leviticus 11 verse 44. And in other verses and books across the Old Testament, we see God saying, "I am God." So if God can say, "I am God" in the Old Testament, and Jesus is God, why didn't Jesus just say, "I am God"? Jesus needed to communicate his deity in a way that his audience would know that he wasn't claiming to be the Father in heaven. If Jesus said that "I am God," his followers would have thought he was making himself out to be the Father in heaven, which he is not. Because we believe in the triune God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who are also one and equal. More on that in another video. Instead, the Gospels portray Jesus as the unique Son of God and divine Son of Man, who is co-equal with the Father in essence. Now, let's read some verses in the Bible that prove the deity of Jesus. Let's head over to John 8, verse 58, where Jesus himself says, "Before Abraham was, I am." This is a significant claim because Jesus was making himself out to be the Old Testament figure, the "I am" of Exodus 3:14. Therefore, by using the title "I am," Jesus was affirming his deity. Another response we can use against this question is that Jesus never refused or rejected when people said he claimed to be God or addressed him as the Lord. In John 10 verse 33, the Jews got riled up and was getting ready to stone Jesus because Jesus, a mere man, claimed to be God. Even though he had the risk of being stoned, Jesus did not deny this claim. Instead, he answered them later on in the chapter. In verse 38, "The Father is in me, and I in the Father." Another situation where the Jewish leaders wanted to kill Jesus for the same reason is in John 5 verse 18. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Even amidst all the threats, Jesus did not deny it. But his response, we read further down in verse 21. "For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it." And it doesn't end there. Jesus continues speaking in verse 22 and 23. "Moreover, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him." In both situations, Jesus could have refused to claim to be God or that he is equal with God to prevent himself getting killed or seriously injured, but he did not deny it. This shows that he is God and is equal to the Father in heaven. Would you believe me if I told you that even God the Father himself said that Jesus is God? Let's turn to Hebrews 1 verse 8 to 12. This passage is a direct reference from Psalms 45 verse 6 and 7. In this passage, we can establish that God the Father is the one speaking. How? Well, first, we can establish that Jesus is not the one speaking, because verse 8 says, "But about the Son," he says. This implies that Jesus is being talked about, and not the actual one speaking. Who is this he that this passage is referring to? Let's go a couple of verses behind to verse 5, where it says, "For to which of the angels did God ever say?" Here we can clearly recognize that God the Father is the one speaking. In verse 6, God the Father tells all the angels to worship him. Continuing from verse 8, now that we have established the Father is the one speaking here, it says, "Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever." So the Father calls Jesus God. Furthermore, in verse 10, God says about Jesus that he laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands, ultimately calling Jesus the Creator. If this is not enough to prove the divinity and deity of Christ, then they are simply in denial. But I will give you one more example. This time, I will prove the deity of Christ using the Quran. Let's go to chapter 57, verse 3 in the Quran, the Surah Al-Hadid, where it says, "He is the first and the last." This is a title that can only be claimed by God. Now, let's return to the Bible in Revelation 1 verse 17, where Jesus says to John, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last." Now, in both of these verses, in both books, the title first and the last is being used, and both believe it is a title for God. How do we know it's Jesus speaking? Well, if you read the next verse, Revelations 1 verse 18, he says, I am the living one. I was dead. And now look, I am alive forever and ever. Jesus is the only one who died and conquered the grave. Muslims don't believe that Allah ever died, so it is clearly not speaking about him. So when Jesus says, I am the first and the last, he is claiming his deity and divinity, equal with the Father in heaven. So no, Jesus did not say the words, I am God, worship me, but he did claim to be God and made himself equal with the Father in heaven. Not just in the verses I mentioned, but other verses across the Bible too. Now, if Jesus needs to say the words, I am God, worship me, to prove that he is God, let's use this same logic against them. Muslims believe that the Quran is the speech of Allah, sent down to his messenger by revelation. They also believe that Jesus is the Messiah. In Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 171. But using the same logic, only Allah has said that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus has never claimed to be the Messiah in the Quran. If you ask them to bring a verse from the Quran where Jesus himself says, I am the Messiah, or I am a spirit sent by Allah, they won't be able to bring it because there is no such verse. This means that Jesus is not the Messiah according to the same logic, which goes against the beliefs of Islam and would make the Quran untrue. I hope this video helped you answer this question. If you have any questions to be answered or any queries, please send them to the email. Thank you for watching.